Tyler Bennett wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled through the maintenance tunnel of the diplomatic station, and his knees hurt from moving across the metal floor. But he had a job to do, and he needed to finish it before the important guests arrived. The cooling system in Section 7 had been acting up for 3 days, and his supervisor told him that alien royalty would be staying in those quarters and everything needed to be perfect, or Tyler would be looking for a new job. Reached the access panel and pulled out his tools and started working on the temperature controls. And the station was quiet because most of the diplomatic staff were at the docking bay, preparing for the arrival ceremony. Tyler liked working alone, because it meant no one would bother him with questions or tell him he was doing things wrong. And he had been fixing systems on this station for 2 years, and he knew every pipe and wire like the back of his hand. He checked his watch and saw that he still had 3 hours before the Zephyrian royal family was supposed to arrive, and that was plenty of time to fix the cooling unit and clean up and get out of there. The panel was stuck, and Tyler had to use extra force to pull it open, and when it finally came loose, he almost fell backward, and he muttered under his breath about cheap station construction. Inside the panel, the wiring looked like a mess, and someone had done a bad repair job before, and Tyler shook his head and started pulling out the burned wires and replacing them with new ones. He was so focused on his work that he did not hear the door to the quarters open, and he did not hear the soft footsteps walking into the room, and he did not notice anything until a voice spoke, right above him. The voice was beautiful and strange, and it said something in a language that sounded like music mixed with wind. And Tyler jumped and hit his head on the bottom of the panel. He rolled out from under the cooling unit and looked up, and his breath caught in his throat because standing above him was the most incredible being he had ever seen. She had skin that glowed with a soft blue light, and her eyes were silver like polished metal, and her hair floated around her head, even though there was no breeze, and she wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight. Tyler scrambled to his feet and nearly tripped over his toolbox. And he said, "I am sorry. I did not know anyone was here." And the translator device in his ear started working, and he heard her words clearly. The woman looked at him with curiosity and said, "This is my private chamber, and you are a human." And she tilted her head and studied him like he was something interesting she had found. Before Tyler could explain why he was there, the door opened again and 6 more women walked in, and they all looked similar to the first one, but each had a different shade of blue skin and different colored eyes. Tyler felt his heart racing because he realized these were the Zephyrian princesses, and they were not supposed to be here yet, and he was in their room with tools spread all over the floor. The first princess stepped closer to him and said, "I am Princess Aria, and these are my sisters." And she pointed to the others and said their names were Luna and Nova and Stella and Aurora and Celeste and Lyra. Tyler tried to back toward the door, but there were princesses on all sides now, and he said, "My name is Tyler Bennett, and I work maintenance, and I was fixing your cooling system, and I will leave right now." But Aria held up her hand and said, "Wait," and her silver eyes seemed to glow brighter, and she said, "There is something different about you." Human. Her sister Luna moved forward, and she had darker blue skin and sharp features, and she said, "Yes, I sense it too." And she looked at Arya and said, "His energy signature is very strong." Tyler had no idea what they were talking about, and he said, "I am just here to fix the air conditioning." And he tried to gather his tools. But Nova laughed and stepped in front of him. Nova had lighter blue skin and bright eyes, and she said, "You are not just anything human." And she smiled at him and said, "You have a gift whether you know it or not." The other sisters were all watching him now, and Tyler felt like a bug under a microscope, and Stella reached out and almost touched his arm, but stopped just before making contact. Stella gasped and said, "His energy responds to me." And she looked at her sisters with excitement and said, "I have never felt anything like this from a human before." Aria moved between Stella and Tyler and said, "Do not touch him without permission, sister." And there was a warning in her voice. Aurora, who had pale blue skin and kind eyes, said we should explain things to him, and she looked at Tyler and said, "You are very special, Tyler Bennett." Tyler finally found his voice and said, "I am not special. I just fix things," and he wished he could disappear, or that this was all a strange dream. But Celeste, who had been quiet, spoke up and said, "In our culture, We can sense energy in all living things, and yours is calling to us, Lyra added. And when a Zephyrian finds someone with compatible energy, it means that person could be a bonded companion. Tyler blinked and said, "What does that mean?" And he did not like the way all 7 sisters were looking at him now. Arya explained that a bonded companion was someone who attended important events with a Zephyrian and shared their energy and received great honor and gifts. Luna cut in and said, "And it appears that all 7 of us feel the connection to you." And she looked at her sisters and said, "This has never happened before." Nova grinned and said, "Which means we have a problem because there is only one of him and 7 of us." The sisters started talking among themselves and their voices rose, and Tyler noticed that when they got emotional, their skin glowed brighter and the air around them felt warmer. Stella said, "I should be his choice because I felt the connection first after Arya and Aurora argued that she had the strongest energy." Match Celeste suggested they should ask Tyler what he wanted, and Lyra agreed that it was only fair to let him choose. But Tyler did not want to choose anything, and he said, "I think there has been a mistake and I should go." And he tried to move toward the door again. Arya blocked his path and her eyes were intense, and she said, "You cannot leave Tyler Bennett," and she smiled and said, "Not until we figure this out." Luna added that he was too important, and Nova said they needed to keep him close, and Tyler realized with growing alarm that he was not going to walk out of this room as easily as he had walked in. The 7 sisters looked at each other and seemed to come to some kind of agreement, and Arya said, "We will give you time to understand what this means." But Luna added that each of them would try to win his favor. And Nova said, "May the best sister win." Tyler stood there surrounded by 7 glowing alien princesses, and he thought about how his day had started with a simple repair job, and now he was apparently the most wanted human on the diplomatic station as the sisters finally stepped back to let him breathe. Tyler picked up his tools with shaking hands, and he knew that his quiet life was over, and whatever came next was going to change everything. Tyler made it back to the maintenance office with his heart still pounding and his hands still shaking, and he set down his toolbox and tried to figure out what had just happened to him. His supervisor walked in and said, "Did you finish the cooling system in Section 7?" And Tyler nodded and said yes, but there was a complication. The supervisor frowned and said, "What kind of complication?" And Tyler did not know how to explain that 7 alien princesses had all decided they wanted him as their companion. Before he could answer, the door opened, and a tall woman in a formal uniform walked in, and she had the kind of face that meant she was used to giving orders and having them followed. She looked at Tyler and said, "Are you Tyler Bennett?" And he nodded, and she said, "I am Commander Patricia Holland, and we need to talk about what happened in the royal quarters." Tyler felt his stomach drop, and he said, "I was just doing my job and I left as soon as I could." And the commander held up her hand. She said, "You are not in trouble," and she sat down and gestured for Tyler to sit too. And she said, "But we have a situation that needs to be handled carefully." The commander explained that the Zephyrian royal family was extremely important, and their visit was meant to establish a trade alliance that would benefit Earth for generations. She said the 7 princesses have informed their mother, the queen, that they have all found a compatible energy match in you, and this is unprecedented. Tyler asked what that meant for him, and the commander said, "It means that you have become a diplomatic asset." And she looked at him seriously and said, "The princesses want to spend time with you during their visit." He started to protest, but the commander said this is not optional, and she explained that refusing the princesses could be seen as an insult and could damage the alliance. Tyler felt trapped, and he said, "I do not know anything about their culture or how to act around royalty." And the commander smiled and said, "You will learn quickly." She told him that he would be given new quarters near the royal section, and that he would attend the formal events with the princesses, and that he needed to be on his best behavior. Tyler asked which princess he was supposed to be with, and the commander said that is the complicated part, and she explained that all 7 sisters were claiming him. She said the queen had decided to let her daughters compete for his attention in the traditional way, and Tyler did not like the sound of that. The commander stood up and said, "You have 2 hours to move your things, and then you will meet with a cultural advisor who will teach you about Zephyrian customs." Tyler walked back to his small room in the crew quarters and looked at his few belongings and wondered how his life had turned upside down so quickly. He packed his clothes and his books and his one photo of his family back on Earth, and he thought about calling his mother but decided against it, because how could he explain this? A young man in a staff uniform came to get him and led him through the station to a section Tyler had never been in before, and everything looked more expensive and cleaner. His new quarters were 3 times the size of his old room and had a real window that looked out at the stars and a bed that was actually comfortable, and Tyler sat down and felt overwhelmed. There was a knock on the door and a woman walked in who introduced herself as Dr. Amy Chen, and she was the cultural advisor, and she carried a large tablet. Dr. Chen sat down and said, "We have a lot to cover," and she started explaining the basics of Zephyrian culture and their traditions and their rules about energy bonding. She said that Zephyrians could sense the life energy in other beings, and when they found someone with compatible energy, it was like finding a missing piece of themselves. Tyler asked why all 7 sisters felt that connection to him, and Dr. Chen said that was the mystery, and she admitted that it had never happened before in recorded Zephyrian history. Explained that the sisters would each try to prove they were the best match for him, and they would do this through a series of traditional competitions and demonstrations. Tyler asked what he was supposed to do, and Dr. Chen said his job was to observe and learn about each sister and eventually choose one. He said, "What if I do not want to choose any of them?" And Dr. Chen looked at him sadly and said, "Then you will offend all of them and possibly ruin the alliance." She continued teaching him about proper greetings and table manners and what topics to avoid in conversation, and Tyler tried to remember everything, but his head was spinning. After 2 hours, Dr. Chen left and told him to rest because tomorrow would be a long day, and Tyler lay on his new bed and stared at the ceiling. He thought about his simple life before today and how he had been happy just fixing things and not being noticed, and now he was at the center of some kind of alien royal competition. Sleep did not come easily, and when it finally did, Tyler dreamed of glowing blue women and silver eyes and voices that sounded like wind chimes. The next morning, a formal uniform was delivered to his quarters, and it fit perfectly, and Tyler wondered who had taken his measurements and when. He put it on and looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back at him. Another knock came, and this time it was a guard who said the princesses requested his presence at breakfast, and Tyler followed the guard through gleaming hallways. They entered a large dining room, and all 7 sisters were already there, and they turned to look at him when he walked in, and Tyler felt his face get hot. Arya smiled and said, "Good morning, Tyler Bennett, and please sit with us," and she gestured to an empty chair at the head of the table. Tyler sat down and noticed that each princess was positioned around the table in a way that gave them all equal distance from him. Luna said, "We hope you slept well," and Nova added that they were excited to spend time with him today. Stella was staring at him with intense eyes, and Aurora smiled warmly, and Celeste looked shy, and Lyra watched him like a cat watching a bird. Breakfast was served, and the food was strange but delicious, and Tyler tried to remember the table manners Dr. Chen had taught him. The sisters talked among themselves and sometimes to him, and each one seemed to be trying to get his attention in different ways. Arya asked him about his work, and Luna asked about his family on Earth, and Nova told jokes that made him laugh. Stella kept looking at him with those intense eyes, and Aurora asked him about his favorite things, and Celeste listened quietly, and Lyra made comments that seemed designed to fluster him. Tyler realized that this was already the competition, and each sister was showing him a different side of herself and trying to make him like her best. After breakfast, Arya said she would like to show him the observation deck, and Luna immediately said she had planned to take him to the botanical gardens. Nova said she wanted to take him flying in a shuttle, and Stella said she could teach him about energy sensing, and the sisters started arguing. Tyler sat there and watched 7 beautiful alien princesses compete for his time, and he understood that this was going to be his life until he made a choice. But how could he choose when he barely knew them, and when choosing one meant disappointing 6 others and possibly causing problems he could not imagine? The queen entered the room and everyone went quiet, and she was tall and regal, and her skin glowed brighter than any of her daughters. She looked at Tyler and said, "You are the human who has captured my daughter's attention," and Tyler stood up and bowed the way Dr. Chen had taught him. The queen smiled and said, "Let us see if you are worthy of even one of them." The queen's name was Seraphina, and she looked at Tyler with eyes that seemed to see right through him, and he felt like he was being measured and weighed and judged all at once. She said, "My daughters tell me you have an unusual energy, and I would like to see this for myself." And she gestured for him to step forward. Tyler walked toward her and tried not to shake, and the queen reached out her hand and held it near his chest without touching him, and her eyes went wide. She pulled her hand back and looked at her daughters and said, "This is remarkable." And she turned to Tyler and said, "You carry the energy of someone who has faced great loss." Tyler felt his throat tighten because she was right, and 2 years ago he had lost his father and his brother in an accident, and he had come to this station to escape those memories. The queen's expression softened, and she said, "Grief can make energy stronger and deeper, and that is what my daughters sense in you." And she nodded slowly and said, "You have survived pain, and that makes you worthy." She told her daughters that they could each spend time with Tyler over the next week, and at the end he would choose one or none, and her decision would be final. The sisters looked at each other, and Arya said, "Thank you, Mother." And Luna bowed her head, and Nova grinned, and the others showed their agreement in different ways. The queen left, and Tyler felt like he could breathe again, and Arya immediately said, "I would like to go first," and Luna protested and said it should be by age. Arya pointed out that she was older than Luna, and Luna's face darkened, and Nova jumped in and said they should let Tyler choose who he spent time with first. All 7 sisters turned to look at Tyler, and he realized this was a test, and whoever he chose first would have an advantage. He thought quickly and said, "Maybe I could spend a little time with each of you today instead of picking one," and he saw relief on some faces and disappointment on others. Arya considered this and said that is fair, and she looked at her sisters and said, "We will each have 2 hours with him today." They agreed, and Arya said she would go first since she had suggested it, and Luna looked annoyed but did not argue. Tyler followed Arya out of the dining room and through the station, and she led him to the observation deck where a massive window showed the stars and planets outside. Arya stood by the window and said, "I wanted to bring you here, because this is where I come to think." And she looked at him and said, "I want you to know me not just as a princess." Tyler appreciated that, and he asked her what she liked to do. And Arya smiled and said she loved to study other cultures and learn languages and understand how different beings lived. She said that was why she had wanted to come on this diplomatic mission, and she asked Tyler about Earth and what his life had been like before the station. Tyler found himself talking more than he expected, and he told her about growing up in a small town and about his family, and about why he had left. Arya listened carefully and said, "Loss is something we all carry." And she touched the window and said, "I lost my father when I was young, and that is why I understand duty." Tyler felt a connection to her in that moment, and he understood why her energy had called to him, and she turned and said, "I hope you will consider me, not because I am the oldest, but because I see you." The 2 hours passed quickly, and when Luna came to get him, Tyler felt like he was just starting to know Arya. Luna took him to the botanical gardens, which were filled with plants from a dozen different worlds, and the air smelled sweet and felt warm. Luna said she had grown these plants herself, and she loved working with living things and watching them grow. And she smiled and said, "I am not like my sisters who prefer politics and competition." She showed him a flower that bloomed only once every 10 years, and said she had been caring for it for all that time, and Tyler said that showed patience. Luna looked at him and said, "Patience is important, but so is knowing when to act," and she stepped closer and said, "I felt your energy the moment you rolled out from under that panel." Tyler asked what his energy felt like to her, and Luna thought for a moment and said, "It feels like a steady flame," and she said her sisters might sense different things, but she sensed strength. She said she wanted someone strong because she was tired of people who only saw her as second to Arya, and she wanted someone who would see her for herself. Tyler understood that feeling, and the 2 hours with Luna went by fast, and when Nova arrived, Luna looked disappointed. Nova took Tyler to a shuttle bay and said they were going flying, and Tyler felt nervous because he had never been in a small spacecraft before, but Nova was an excellent pilot, and she took them out into space near the station and did tricks and loops that made Tyler's stomach flip. She laughed at his expression and said life should be an adventure, and she asked him if he wanted to try flying. Tyler said he did not know how, and Nova said that was the point of adventure, and she guided his hands to the controls and helped him steer They flew past asteroids and around the station, and Nova told him stories about places she had been and things she had seen, and Tyler felt free. When they returned, Nova said, "I know my sisters will try to impress you with depth and meaning, but I want to show you joy." And she smiled and said, "Life is too short to be serious all the time." Tyler thought about that and realized she was right, and the 2 hours with Nova left him feeling lighter than he had in a long time. Stella was waiting when they docked, and she took Tyler to a quiet meditation room and said she wanted to teach him about energy. She sat across from him and told him to close his eyes and breathe slowly and focus on what he felt inside himself. Tyler tried to do what she said, and at first he felt nothing, but then he started to sense something like a warm current moving through his body. Stella said, "Good, you are feeling your own energy, and now try to sense mine." And Tyler focused harder, and he could feel something from her like a vibration in the air. She opened her eyes and said, "You have natural ability, and most humans cannot sense energy at all. But you can, and that is why we are drawn to you." Tyler asked what it meant, and Stella said it meant they could share energy and strengthen each other, and she said a bond between them would be powerful. She looked at him intensely and said, "I do not want you because it is tradition or competition." And she said, "I want you because together we could do great things." The 2 hours with Stella left Tyler feeling strange and aware of things he had never noticed before. Aurora met him next and took him to a music room and said she wanted to share her art with him. She played an instrument that looked like a harp but sounded like 100 voices singing, and the music was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once. Tyler listened and felt tears in his eyes, and when she finished, he said, "That was incredible." Aurora said, "Music is how I express what words cannot," and she asked him what he felt when he listened. Tyler said he felt understood, and Aurora smiled and said, "That is what I hoped for." And she said, "Connection is not about words or energy alone, but about truly seeing another person." She played more songs, and some were happy and some were sad, and Tyler realized that Aurora was showing him her heart through her music. When their time ended, Aurora said, "Whatever you choose, I hope you will remember this." And Tyler said he would never forget. Celeste came next, and she took him to a library and said she was not good with words like her sisters, but she wanted to show him what she loved. She showed him books and scrolls from across the galaxy and told him stories about ancient times and lost civilizations. Tyler listened and asked questions, and Celeste seemed to relax and talk more, and he realized she was shy but brilliant. She said, "I know I am not as bold as my sisters, but I notice things they do not." And she looked at him and said, "I see that you are kind even when you are afraid." Tyler felt seen by her in a different way, and the 2 hours passed quietly but meaningfully. Finally, Lyra came, and she took him to a training room and said she wanted to spar with him. Tyler said he was not a fighter, and Lyra grinned and said that is exactly why this will be interesting. She taught him basic moves, and they practiced, and she was fast and strong, but also patient. And when Tyler managed to block one of her strikes, she looked impressed. Lyra said, "I value someone who tries even when they might fail," and she said, "Courage is not about winning but about facing challenges." The 2 hours with Lyra left Tyler tired but feeling more confident. When the day ended, Tyler returned to his quarters and collapsed on his bed, and his mind was full of 7 different women and 7 different connections, and he had no idea how he would ever choose. Tyler woke up the next morning with his whole body aching from the sparring session with Lyra, and his mind still spinning from everything that had happened the day before. He looked at the clock and saw it was early, but he could not sleep anymore. So he got up and went to the small kitchen in his quarters. While he was making coffee, there was a knock on his door, and when he opened it, he found Nova standing there with a smile on her face. She said, "I know I am not supposed to be here, but I wanted to see you before my sisters wake up." And Tyler let her in because he did not know what else to do. Nova sat down and said, "I have been thinking about our time together." And she looked at him seriously and said, "I need to tell you something important." She explained that the competition between the sisters was getting more intense, and that some of them were forming alliances and planning strategies. Nova said, "I do not want to play those games." And she said, "I want you to know that whatever happens, I will respect your choice, even if it is not Tyler appreciated her honesty, and he asked her what she thought he should do. And Nova said, "Follow your heart. Not your head, because energy connections are about feeling, not thinking." After Nova left, Tyler got ready for the day and wondered what would happen next, and he did not have to wait long because a message came saying the Queen wanted to see him. He walked to the royal quarters and found the Queen sitting with Commander Holland and Dr. Chen, and they all looked serious. The Queen said, "Sit down, Tyler Bennett," and he sat, and she said, "I have been watching how you interact with my daughters, and I am impressed." She explained that in Zephyrian culture the bonding ceremony was sacred, and whoever he chose would be bound to him for life unless both agreed to break the bond. Tyler felt his stomach drop, and he said, "I did not know it was permanent," and the Queen nodded and said, "That is why this choice matters so much." Commander Holland added that the alliance with the Zephyrians depended on this going well, and Dr. Chen said that Tyler needed to be sure of his choice. The Queen said, "I will give you 3 more days to decide, and then we will have the bonding ceremony," and she looked at him kindly and said, "Choose wisely." Tyler left the meeting feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him, and he walked through the station trying to clear his head. He found himself in the maintenance tunnels where he used to work, and he sat down on the floor and thought about his old life. A voice said, "I thought I might find you here." And Tyler looked up to see Arya standing at the entrance to the tunnel. She sat down next to him and said, "Sometimes I hide in places like this too," and she said, "Being a princess means everyone always watches you." Tyler said he understood that feeling now. And Arya smiled and said, "You have handled this better than most would." She said, "I want to tell you something about my sisters." And Tyler listened as Arya explained the dynamics between them. Arya said, "Luna has always felt like she lives in my shadow, and Nova tries to hide her loneliness with humor, and Stella is more sensitive than she appears." She continued saying Aurora uses music to cope with sadness, and Celeste feels invisible, and Lyra acts tough because she thinks showing emotion is weakness. Tyler asked why she was telling him this, and Arya said, "Because I want you to make the right choice, even if it is not me." And she said, "My sisters deserve happiness." Tyler felt his respect for Arya grow, and he realized she truly cared about her sisters more than winning. The next day, Tyler was summoned to a formal dinner with all the princesses and their mother and various diplomats and officials. He wore his formal uniform and tried to remember all the etiquette rules. And when he entered the dining hall, everyone turned to look at him. Tyler was seated between Luna and Aurora, and across from Stella, and the dinner was filled with careful conversation and hidden meanings. He noticed that the sisters were watching each other as much as they were watching him, and he realized the competition was reaching its peak. After dinner, Stella asked him to walk with her, and they went to the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Stella said, "I need to know if you feel the energy connection between us," and Tyler admitted that he did feel something, but he was not sure what it meant. She said, "It means we are compatible in a way that is rare." And she took his hand, and he felt a surge of warmth and light. Stella said, "This is what we could have," and her eyes glowed brighter and said, "A bond with me would make you stronger." Tyler pulled his hand back gently and said, "I need time," and Stella looked hurt, but nodded and said, "I understand." The next morning, Celeste came to his quarters and said she wanted to show him something, and she led him to a private garden he had not seen before. The garden was filled with flowers that glowed softly, and a small stream ran through it, and Celeste said she came here when she needed peace. She sat by the stream, and Tyler sat next to her, and she said, "I know I am not as exciting as my sisters, but I want you to know that I see you." Celeste said, "I see how tired you are from all this attention, and I see how you try to be fair to everyone," and she said, "Those are the qualities I value." Most Tyler felt comfortable with her in a way that was different from the others, and he said, "Thank you for understanding." That afternoon, Lyra challenged him to another sparring session, and this time she pushed him harder, and Tyler struggled to keep up. When they finished, Lyra said, "You are getting better," and she looked at him and said, "I push you because I believe you can handle it." She said, "Too many people in my life treat me like I am fragile because I am a princess, but you treat me like an equal, and that matters to me." Tyler said he respected her strength, and Lyra smiled and said, That is why I want you to choose me." That evening, Aurora invited him to another music session, and this time she taught him to play her instrument, and his attempts were clumsy, but she was patient. Aurora said music is not about perfection, it is about expression, and she said, "I think you understand that." She played a new song she had composed and said, "I wrote this after meeting you," and the music was hopeful and bright. Tyler listened and felt his heart ache because he knew that no matter what he chose, someone would be hurt. The next day was his last day before the decision, and Nova took him flying again. But this time they flew further from the station. She said, "I want to show you something," and she piloted them to a nearby moon and landed on its surface. They got out of the shuttle in protective suits, and Nova pointed at the view of the planet and the stars and said, "This is freedom." She said, "If you choose me, we can go anywhere and see everything." And she said, "I will never cage you the way this decision is caging." Tyler appreciated what she was offering, but he also knew that running away was not the answer. When they returned, Luna was waiting, and she said, "I need to speak with you," and she took him to the botanical gardens. Luna said, "I know my sisters have been showing you their best selves, but I want to show you the truth." And she showed him a plant that was dying. She said, "Even with all my care, this plant is failing." And she said, "Sometimes things do not work out, no matter how much we want them." Luna looked at him and said, "If you choose me, I will not promise perfection, but I will promise honesty and effort." Tyler said those were good things to promise, and Luna said, "Then remember that when you decide." That night, Tyler could not sleep, and he went to the observation deck and found Arya already there. She said, "I could not sleep either," and they stood together looking at the stars, and she said, "Tomorrow your life changes forever." Tyler said he was scared of making the wrong choice, and Arya said there is no wrong choice, only different paths. She turned to him and said, "I have to tell you that I have feelings for you beyond the energy connection." And she said, "But I also have feelings for my sisters." Arya said, "If you do not choose me, I will be sad, but I will survive." And she said, "What matters most is that you are honest with yourself." Tyler thanked her for her wisdom, and they stood together in comfortable silence. The next morning, Tyler woke, knowing it was decision day, and his hands were shaking as he got dressed. A guard came to escort him to the ceremony hall, and when he entered, he saw all 7 sisters standing in a line with the Queen on a raised platform. The Queen said, "Tyler Bennett, you have spent time with each of my daughters, and now you must choose." And she said, "Who will you bond with?" Tyler looked at each sister and saw hope and fear and love in their eyes, and he took a deep breath. He said, "I have thought about this carefully," and he said, "Each of you has shown me something beautiful and unique." Tyler continued and said, "But I have realized something important," and the room went quiet. He said, "I cannot choose one of you." And he saw disappointment flash across their faces, but he kept talking. Tyler said, "Because choosing would mean I was only thinking about myself," and he said, "This decision affects all of you and the Alliance and more." He looked at the Queen and said, "I think there is another way." The ceremony hall went completely silent, and Tyler could feel everyone staring at him, and he knew what he was about to say could either save the situation or destroy everything. The Queen leaned forward and said, "Explain yourself, Tyler Bennett," and her voice was not angry but curious. Tyler took a deep breath and said, "I have spent time with each of your daughters, and I have felt the energy connection with all of them. And that is real," he continued saying. "But I have also learned about Zephyrian culture, and I know that bonding is sacred and permanent, and I cannot enter into that lightly." The Queen nodded slowly and said, "Go on." Tyler said, "What if instead of one bonding ceremony, we created something new?" And he saw the sisters looking at each other with confusion. He explained that he could serve as a companion to all 7 sisters, not bonded to anyone but available to all. And he said, "This way, no one loses and the Alliance remains strong." Luna stepped forward and said, "That is not how our traditions work." And Stella added that the energy connection demands a bond. But Nova looked thoughtful and said, "Maybe he has a point." And Aurora said it would be better than choosing just one. The Queen stood up and said, "This is unprecedented." And she looked at her advisors who were whispering. Among themselves, Commander Holland spoke up and said, "From Earth's perspective, this could actually strengthen the Alliance, because it would involve all the princesses." Dr. Chen added that creating new traditions is how cultures grow, and the Queen Considered this area stepped forward and said, "Mother, I think Tyler is showing wisdom." And she looked at her sisters and said, "He is trying to honor all of us." Celeste quietly said, "I would rather share him than lose him completely." And Lyra nodded in agreement. The queen looked at each of her daughters and said, "Is this what you all want?" And one by one they agreed, though some looked more uncertain than others. The queen sat back and said, "Very well," and she said, "We will create a new tradition today." And she said, "Tyler Bennett, you will be named the united companion to the 7 princesses of Zephyr." She explained that he would attend events with all of them, and share time with each of them equally, and maintain the energy connection without a permanent bond. The queen added that this arrangement would last for 1 year, and at the end of that time Tyler could choose to bond with one sister, or leave or continue as he was. Tyler felt relief wash over him, and he bowed and said, "Thank you for your understanding." The ceremony continued, but instead of a bonding ritual, there was a new ceremony that the queen created on the spot. Each sister came forward and placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder and spoke a blessing, and when all 7 had done this, Tyler felt a warmth spread through his body. The queen said, "The energy of my daughters now recognizes you, and you are part of our family." And she smiled and said, "May this arrangement bring peace and prosperity." After the ceremony there was a celebration, and Tyler found himself surrounded by diplomats and officials who all wanted to congratulate him. Commander Holland pulled him aside and said, "You just created a diplomatic miracle." And she said, "I do not know if you are brilliant or insane." Tyler said he was probably both, and she laughed and said, "Either way, you saved the alliance." Over the next few weeks, Tyler settled into his new role, and he spent time with each sister according to a schedule they had all agreed on. With Arya, he attended diplomatic meetings and learned about politics and strategy, and she taught him how to read people and situations. With Luna, he worked in the gardens and learned about patience and growth, and she showed him that beauty takes time. With Nova, he went on adventures and explored new places, and she taught him that life was meant to be lived fully. With Stella, he practiced energy sensing and meditation, and she helped him understand the connection he shared with all of them. With Aurora, he listened to music and learned about art and expression, and she showed him how to find peace in creativity. With Celeste, he read books and discussed ideas, and she taught him that quiet moments could be just as valuable as exciting ones. With Lyra, he trained and pushed his limits, and she showed him that he was stronger than he believed. Each sister brought something different to his life, and Tyler realized that he was learning and growing in ways he never expected. But it was not always easy, and there were moments when the sisters competed for his attention, or when jealousy flared up. One day, Luna and Stella had an argument about whose turn it was to spend time with Tyler, and he had to mediate between them. Another time, Nova took him on an adventure that ran late, and Aurora was upset because she had planned a special concert for him. Tyler learned to navigate these conflicts, and he tried to be fair and honest with everyone. The sisters also learned to work together, and they began to see that sharing Tyler meant they could support each other in new ways. Arya helped Luna feel more confident, and Nova made Celeste laugh, and Stella taught Lyra to meditate, and the bonds between the sisters grew stronger. 3 months into the arrangement, the queen called Tyler to speak with her privately, and she said, "I want to know how you are truly feeling." Tyler admitted that it was challenging but rewarding, and he said, "I care about all of them, and I want this to work." The queen said, "I can see that," and she said, "You have brought my daughters closer together, and that was not something I expected." She told him that the alliance with Earth was stronger than ever, and that other species were interested in similar arrangements with their own royalty. Tyler said he hoped he had done the right thing, and the queen said time would tell. But so far she was pleased. As the months passed, Tyler continued to grow closer to each sister, and he began to understand the unique energy each one carried. He realized that Arya's energy was steady and grounding like the earth, and Luna's was nurturing like water. Nova's energy was wild and free, like wind, and Stella's was bright and intense, like fire. Aurora's energy was harmonious and flowing, like music, and Celeste's was deep and vast, like space. Lyra's energy was sharp and focused, like lightning. Together their energies balanced each other, and Tyler found that being connected to all 7 made him feel more complete than he had ever Felt 6 months into the arrangement. Tyler was invited to visit the Zephyrian homeworld with the princesses, and he eagerly agreed. The planet was beautiful with purple skies and crystal forests and cities that glowed with the same light as the prince. Says the sisters showed him their childhood homes and introduced him to their people, and Tyler was welcomed with warmth and curiosity. The Zephyrians had never seen a human before, and they were fascinated by Tyler and his connection to all 7 princesses. An old Zephyrian woman approached him in the market and said, "You are the one who created a new path." And she smiled and said, "My granddaughters are arguing over who should be your united companion." Now Tyler realized that what had started as a solution to his problem had become something bigger, and people were inspired by the idea. On the last night of the visit, the sisters took Tyler to a sacred mountain where they could see the entire planet spread out below them. They sat together, in a circle with Tyler in the middle, and they joined hands, and their energy flowed together and created a light that rose up into the sky. Area said, "This is what we have created together." And Luna added that it was more beautiful than anything they could have made alone. Nova said, "You changed our lives." Tyler, Bennett, and Stella said, "You taught us that there are different kinds of bonds." Aurora said, "You showed us that love does not have to be limited." And Celeste said, "You gave us permission to be ourselves." Lyra said, "You made us stronger." And the queen, who had come to watch, said, "And you made our family whole." Tyler looked at each sister and said, "You have all changed my life too." And he said, "I came to this station to hide from loss, but you taught me to embrace connection." The 7 sisters and Tyler sat on that mountain as the sun set, and their combined energy glowed brighter than the stars. When they returned to the diplomatic station, Tyler knew that the year was more than half over, and soon he would have to make another decision. But he also knew that whatever he chose, these 7 women would always be part of his life, and that the connections they had built were real and lasting. The Queen announced that the arrangement had been so successful that it would become an official option in Zephyrian culture for anyone who felt multiple compatible connections. Tyler had accidentally started a revolution in tradition, and he did not know whether to be proud or terrified. He walked through the station that night. Tyler thought about the maintenance worker he had been and the person he had become. He had learned that sometimes the best solution was not to choose at all, but to create something new, and he had learned that family could be made, not just born, and that love could take many forms. The stars outside the window seemed brighter than ever, and Tyler smiled because for the first time in years, he was not running from his past, but building toward his future. With 7 glowing sisters by his side and a whole galaxy of possibilities ahead, Tyler Bennett knew that his story was just beginning.